Hello, everybody. Can you hear me at the back? Excellent. Thank you. We're going to get started, and please, this is informal. Feel free at any point to get up and get coffee or some more food. We're going to begin with an announcement from one of the staff members here at the museum, so I'm going to pass the mic to her to begin.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us this afternoon. I hope you'll take some time to go up to the galleries after your meeting is done. My name is June Black. I'm the Associate Curator for Academic Programs here at the museum. So I handle all access to the museum at the university level. I recognize many of you in the audience who have already been using our collections for your curriculum. But if you haven't yet used the museum in your teaching, I just wanted to make you aware of some of the things that we have available. We have about 14,000 works in the collection, and about 60% of those are searchable on our online database. So you can just go to our webpage, jsma.edu, and check out the collection. If there's anything that makes sense in your teaching, you can feel free to email me, and I can try to make those works available to you and your students. We also have changing exhibitions that rotate pretty much on a term-by-term basis. So you can check those out and see if they make sense for your classes to come visit as well. I also left materials on the table. We have a very full calendar of events. Our primary days for events are Wednesday evenings and Saturday afternoons. But we have lectures and talks, artist talks, all the time at the museum. So check out our calendar of events. I also left a general brochure about the museum and our collections on your tables. Again, my name is June Black. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Thank you.
Given that the JSMA lets us use these beautiful spaces, it's a good opportunity for you to hear and be reminded about the other activities that can bring you into this fine museum and how to use it as a teaching resource. So we're always pleased to have June introduce what they do just before we start. I want to let you know that this workshop will be recorded. Gretchen Drew, our communications person, is over by the far wall, and she is recording this. One of the reasons for that is that we want to make it available to you on our website in case you want to review. We did not bring you paper handouts this time, so it will be useful for you to have reference to this PowerPoint after we leave here today in case you want to refer back to anything or share it with anyone. So it'll be online within a matter of a couple of days, probably. Right, Gretchen?
The PowerPoint, absolutely. Video may take a little while.
Great. So PowerPoint will be available very quickly and the video itself later. One of the reasons we're going to use the mic is to make sure that what I say and all of your good comments and questions get recorded as well. So when we get to questions and answers, I will try to bring you the mic or else just repeat what you've said. So that might be easier. Actually, it's probably less cumbersome, so that we make sure that we get all of that good input onto the recording. And one last logistical point. When you leave, could you leave your name tag on our registration table just outside the doors again? We recycle those. So if you want to keep it, if it's a badge of honor that you've attended today, take it home with you, take it to your office and pin it prominently on the wall. Otherwise, if you don't think you'll reuse it, just leave it for us and we'll put it to good use. As those of you who know my presentation style will not be surprised that I'm going to walk around with this microphone. I walk better, I think better on my feet and mobile than I do stationary. There we go. So I'll just, oh, I see. Okay, this is going to, thank you. I want to say some other thanks to the gentlemen who are providing our tech support. So inconspicuously, thank you for getting me set up. And also, I really want to thank the folks in our office in academic affairs, without whom these things simply wouldn't happen. We had a capacity response today. It's no surprise that almost every seat is full, and there may be a few more people dribbling in. First of all, I'd like to thank Academic Affairs staff and most particularly Sonia Runberg for doing this for us. It's a huge part of her job. It's an enormous amount of work, and we're grateful to you, Sonia. Thank you. Also to Gretchen Drew, our communications person, who will record this and make sure that it is legible and audible for you in the various ways we make it available. So this is always a team effort. I have a number of my colleagues here from Academic Affairs, and we have a colleague from UA Leadership here too. And that is all to back me up. They can catch me if I slip, which happens every once in a while. And we can also contribute to the conversation from a variety of different perspectives. So thanks to Doug Blandy and Ken Doxey and Jane Gordon for coming, and for Deborah Olson for being here. And that is a sign of the kind of open and collaborative discussion we want to have. Here's what we're planning. I have a 15 or 16 slide PowerPoint that I'm going to walk through, and it'll give you the basics. Beyond that, we can stop at any point, and we will leave a significant amount of time at the end of our block of time together for you to ask questions. This is a really big topic, and I'm delighted to have a full room. What it means is that people are paying attention and are interested in the process of NTTF review and promotion. Some of you may be here because your units are currently working on developing policies on exactly those topics. Some of you may be here because you yourselves are interested in promotion, and others will be here because you're going to be in charge of putting together people's promotion files. So I'd actually just love a show of hands so I have some idea of who's in the room. Could I ask you, if you yourself are thinking of coming up for promotion and are here for information to do with your own scenario, could you raise your hands? Oh, that's terrific. That means that we're getting the word out and that we are reaching directly the people who will want this information for their own promotions. Great. Are you a supervisor who will be overseeing the construction of somebody's file and the evaluation of it? Okay, excellent, good. We're really glad to see you. And I ask that you refer any of your colleagues who are department heads, deans, associate deans, unit heads, who need to compile these files and get them through, to contact me if you have questions, and that the same applies to you. Please know that we're always available to discuss this with you. Are there those who are here because you're in the middle of policy development and you wanted to hear? Aha, yes, excellent. I would expect that everybody's in the middle of policy development all the time at the moment, right? So, yeah, no surprise. So before we lay out anything firm and definitive, I want to recognize that this is, like last year, this is a first, by the way. It's a first second. What I mean by that, it's the first time I'm doing a new presentation for the second time based on the CBA. So hooray, that means we're into round 2, right? Which is a very good thing, and it means that we have made a lot of progress in the last 12 months. And what I will be presenting on the slides is material that's taken almost entirely out of the collective bargaining agreement. I will wave this at you. Mine is pretty tattered. It has my name on it and a million tabs and a great deal of scribbling in it. I expect you all have your own copies, whether hard copy or virtual copy that you use online. But most of what I will lay out on the slides, what I've put on the slides, is material that comes directly from Article 19 of the Collective Bargaining Agreement. And one of the reasons we didn't make you a handout was because you have that information available to you in the Collective Bargaining Agreement itself. Okay, there's our famous disclaimer, which we actually built for this presentation last year and have since been applying to all of our PowerPoints. If you really want it word for word, you're welcome to look it up again, or I can dictate it to you at any time. But the most important thing is to move on to the slides of substance. And I think I need a third hand to get my remote control. Hang on here. Okay. Ah, even a nice fade. Okay. So here we are. Our topic today is 2 different kinds of review. We're going to talk somewhat briefly about review for career NTTF for contract renewal, and we're going to spend a little more time on review for NTTF career promotion. We held a workshop recently, about 3 weeks ago, for officers of research in NTTF jobs and promotion for officers of research. Do we have any officers of research in the room? Oh, I saw a couple hands. Okay. So some of what, or actually quite a lot of what is in today's presentation is relevant to you. There will be some pieces that are geared specifically to instructional positions, but not many. And I urge you to raise any questions specific to research files at any point during the presentation, okay? Okay, so yes, today's date, that's right, that we're doing well. There's a lot happening in our office right now, so every time something comes out exactly right, it's a triumph. Okay, so CBA Article 19 deals with two different kinds of review. Contract review, which is now mandated and mandatory for every time an NTTF contract comes up for renewal. As you know, career NTTF are on contract lengths of a minimum of 1 year. After 4 one-year contracts, they go to 2-year contracts, and once they are promoted to the second rank, contracts go to 3 years. So we do need to do a review every time somebody's contract is up for renewal. We do one review every contract period, and because the longest contract we have now for NTTF is 3 years, that means we do a review at a minimum of every 3 years. So every contract period or every 3 years, whichever is sooner. If you're on a yearly contract, you need to be reviewed that year before your contract is renewed. If you're on a 2-year, you need to be reviewed by the end of the second year before you're renewed. And if you're on a 3-year, you need to be reviewed at the end of the 3rd year before your contract is renewed. If you happen to be up for contract renewal and promotion at the same time, just one review will suffice. We don't want to be gluttons for punishment. One review will do it. So if you're up for promotion at the same time as you're up for contract renewal, one review will take care of both. That said, the decisions on renewal and on promotion are independent. So we'll get to this again later. It is entirely possible that you can have your contract renewed, but your promotion denied. Okay? And we'll talk about that again later. That is because, I'll just drop in some of the keywords now and you can be thinking about it until we get to that point on another slide. That is because, other than for librarians, we no longer have an up or out rule for promotion for non-tenure track faculty. So you can be denied promotion but remain on contract and be hired again on contract even if you didn't get the promotion. And we're going to talk about that more. Okay, so just some principles that we want to be keeping in mind. As we were saying, in the implementation of the collective bargaining agreement, there's a lot of policy that is being written. And we started last year, we're continuing this fall, we will continue through the winter and spring. We may conceivably still be doing this a year from now in fall 16, but I hope not. In any case, it's specifically right now that units are developing policy on non-tenure track assignment of professional duties and responsibilities. And hand in hand with that goes a review and refinement of your criteria for review of any kind and the criteria for promotion. So my guess is that all of you have already had or will soon be having a meeting of all of your faculty at which you discuss that, develop your policies for your particular unit, and then feed it back through your unit heads and through your deans, and it will end up with us in academic affairs. That means that there's a lot of hard work going on right now, and it also means that we don't have approved set of criteria against which to measure a file right now. So that's what I meant when I said we're in a transition year. There is good standard practice in a lot of units, and so a lot of this is not being invented from scratch. We're not making this up from nothing in a lot of cases. There are good standard practices, there are good criteria. They may be refined and changed through this process, but in most units there is something in place that at least allows us to move forward. We would never, ever, ever want to hold up somebody's promotion simply because the policy document in his or her department was not yet approved. We're not going to say, okay, we're banning all promotion files until we have those policies approved. That would work to the detriment of the individual faculty member, and it would be counterproductive. So this is a kind of a both reassurance and a warning that if you're coming up for this year for promotion, or even for contract renewal, we will use the documents in place, some of which will be well fixed, some of which will still be relatively fluid, and we're going to have to ask for everybody's good judgment, goodwill, good practice to make this happen in a year when we don't yet have final documents, okay? If it's a particular challenge in your unit, I urge you to get in touch with me. Don't forget that if you are eligible for promotion now, and if the criteria for promotion change significantly from the ones that were in place when you were first hired, you have the option of having your case evaluated either by the ones that were in place when you were first hired at the beginning of your 6 years of service leading to promotion, or you can choose the newer ones as they are currently being developed. If you're faced with that kind of a situation and there's a real difference, a significant difference between the older document and the one that's currently in development, let's sit down and talk about it. I would want to have a conversation with the person who is evaluating your file, your department head or your dean, and with you so that we come to an understanding of what the list of criteria are that we're going to use to assess the file. A very basic principle for all of our policies is that they and the procedures, description of procedures, must be available to faculty, right? So that's a bedrock principle for all of the policies we're going to be governed by and are already governed by. They've got to be available to you. So that can be in a hard copy in a file folder in the department office. It can be on your website, which is most often the case. It can be handed to you when you are first hired and then be available to you for subsequent consultation. But everybody needs to know where those policies and list of procedures reside, know how to get to them, and have easy access to them. So that's just a reminder on that point. We've already covered point 3. If promotion criteria change, faculty can elect either the current one, the most up-to-date one, or the one that was in place when they were hired. Promotion processes must now involve a review committee. And I want to point out as a larger global comment that that is part of bringing the promotion process for NTTF into line with standard best practices for tenure-related promotion. So in many of the changes or elaborations we've made to the process for NTTF promotion files, it is in order to bring them into closer agreement with the way we handle tenure-related promotion cases. So that has always been the case in my 24 years here for tenure-related faculty, that there has to be a unit committee reviewing the file, and it is now the case for NTTF promotion as well. So if you are currently working on your unit document on this, don't forget you need to build in the provision of committee review for NTTF promotion cases. The last point addresses our colleagues who are officers of research more than anybody else. External reviews for NTTF promotion are needed as applicable. So when you're developing your policy, you're going to state whether you're going to require external reviews. Most often, those external reviews will be needed in cases where people are research associates or research professors in those two classifications, because the expectations for those officers of research is that they have impact, their research has impact well outside the institution. Therefore, it's entirely reasonable and necessary to ask for external reviews of their impact, the success, and the quality and quantity of their work. For most officers of instruction, and for many research assistants, their impact is primarily within the institution, even if it goes outside their immediate department or unit. So I have not yet seen, in the approximately 60 NTTF files that I've reviewed, I haven't seen external letters required for any officer of instruction. I've seen them required only for officers of research in research associate or research professor classifications. All right, so don't let this panic you. Excuse me, residual cough. I'll try not to do that into the mic. But make sure in your policy development that you are specifying whether external reviews are needed or not. A quick water break. Okay, let me see. I've left my hard copy sitting here. Too many pieces to juggle here. Okay. So let's quickly run through contract renewal and review for contract renewal, and then we'll get to what may be of greater interest to you, which is review for promotion. So I'm quoting directly from the CBA here. In that contract renewal, which has to be done at least once in the length of the contract, the purpose of that review is to determine, quote, if the NTTF member is meeting the standard of excellence appropriate to a major research university, unquote. And while that seems incredibly obvious, it's also really important to say it and to speak it and to remember it. And this will be important when we come back to the question of how one proves that one is meritorious for promotion as well. In all of our assessment of faculty, both non-tenure track and tenure track, it's absolutely essential that we remember that we are a preeminent, comprehensive, public, R1 research university. And it behooves us, in fact, it's not only desirable, it's absolutely essential that we have the best possible faculty. Of our more than 1,300 faculty, and that's both researchers and officers of instruction, fully 2/3 are non-tenure track. And that means that it is both in the best interests of those non-tenure track faculty and of the institution to insist on only the best possible standards in both teaching and research. It's what makes us who we are. It's what allows us, in part, to keep our AAU standing. It's very important for what we do and how we interact with our students. So that issue of excellence appropriate to a major research university is not just empty rhetoric. It's actually definitional for who we are as a university. So the goal of contract renewal, well, it would be irresponsible of us to renew a contract without making sure that the person in the job was performing successfully. So it's good business practice, but it's also, quote, to help NTTF grow as scholars, researchers, and educators. Pick whichever of those is appropriate to your particular job. Identify areas of strength and identify areas that need improvement. Again, that sounds like a no-brainer, but I think it's really important to recognize that this is one of the processes where we have perhaps not had the machinery in place or realized the importance of it or given it enough attention in the past. And what we really need to do is an objective review that both recognizes somebody's strengths and points out where they could be doing a better job. And one of the things that is really crucial now in these periodic reviews for contract renewal is that they will give us a kind of a track record that we will look back at, that we can look back at when people come up for promotion. So people should be given periodic assessments to let them know whether they're on track, whether they are indeed excelling in their jobs, or whether their performance is merely satisfactory or even unsatisfactory. So we're getting much better, I think, as it is now mandated and as we are now adopting, at providing those benchmark assessments for non-tenure track faculty that will give them a good sense of their standing in the department, where they might be able to improve, where they're already excelling, where they're creating an identifiable niche for themselves. And I think that conversation about, so where am I on the trajectory towards promotion, is a very reasonable conversation to have at the moment of contract renewal evaluation as well. So we've already talked about the timing. The timing of a contract renewal review has to be each contract period prior to consideration for renewal, or saying the same thing in different words, once every 3 academic or fiscal years, whichever is sooner. Academic and fiscal are both in there because most instructional NTTF are on September 16th through June 15th contracts, academic year, whereas many officers of research are on a 12-month, July 1 to June 30th contract. Ma'am. Yeah. Yes, let me clarify that again. And this is something that changed with our adoption of the collective bargaining agreement, so it's worth saying over and over until we all understand this fully. So if you come in as a career non-tenure-track faculty member, you will first be on 4 successive 1-year contracts. So the minimum length of contract for a career non-tenure-track faculty member is 1 year. After 4 1-year contracts, you go to a 2-year contract. So in years 5 and 6, you'll be on a 2-year contract, and then you can remain on 2-year contracts indefinitely unless and until you get promoted. And if you are promoted to the 2nd rank, and all of our NTTF classifications have 3 ranks now, when you're promoted the first time to the 2nd rank, you then move to a 3-year contract, and all your contracts subsequent to that will be 3 years. Did that answer your question? Okay. All right. Any other questions before we switch to yes, ma'am. Okay, good questions. And it shows attentive listening. I applaud you for that. So there was a time in the university's policy when on our website, and in fact we've only just taken this down, it was pretty hopelessly outdated, there was an up or out expectation for all non-tenure track faculty, just as there are for tenure track faculty at the first promotion. When tenure track faculty are moving from associate to full, it is optional and they don't lose their jobs if they're not promoted the 2nd time. But we had in place for non-tenure track faculty, you're either promoted or you lose your job. We negotiated and talked about that one long and hard, and we recognized that that was not necessarily a reasonable expectation for non-tenure track faculty, and by removing that up or out provision, we're able to do a much better job of defining what promotion really means. We're going to get to that in a minute. Promotion is not recognition of longevity of service. It's not automatic. You don't put in 6 years and get promoted. It needs to be something more than that. And we can make it something more than that now that we have removed the provision that you lose your job if you're not promoted. The one area, and this is to answer your question, I did not lose sight of your question, I promise. There was a special carve-out, there is a special carve-out, a special provision in the collective bargaining agreement for librarians, most of whom are non-tenure track faculty. That is because the library felt strongly that in the best practices of the world of librarianship, it was very important to have that up or out provision in there. So that is the one classification of non-tenure track faculty where the up or out provision still pertains. Did that answer your question? Okay, great. Okay, so once again, I think this might be my last slide on contract renewal review. For instructional non-tenure track faculty, obviously, the review includes student evaluations. It would be remiss of us not to look at your student evaluations if your primary duties and responsibilities are instructional. There also needs to be a minimum of 1 peer review per contract period. So if you're on a year-long contract, you must have a peer review from another faculty member during that year. Once every 2 years if you're on a 2-year, once every 3 years minimum if you're on a 3-year contract. For research NTTF, obviously that peer visit to a classroom doesn't pertain, so the material provided and looked at for the review is different. For that, the general category is assessment of quality of work and outcomes by established procedures. Nice and vague, what you are all doing is establishing those procedures right now, right? For librarians, and again, because there are very specific professional profiles that pertain to each of these classifications, for librarians, what will be assessed for the contract renewal review is demonstrated achievement in professional roles. And I should say that in every one of these cases, again, it's just common sense, but I think we need to make the point frequently that the review has to be pegged to your job description. You can only be reviewed on what you were hired to do, right? That's a pretty fundamental principle, and we need to make sure that we are not assessing people on things that we didn't hire them to do, that we don't give them the capacity to do, and for which there is no expectation. On the other hand, we need to review them fully in all of those duties and responsibilities that are in their job description. So this is just speaks to the thoroughness and the appropriateness of the review in each classification. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Right, so that's a good question, Laura. Thank you. Laura's question is, who is the peer in peer review? Who is appropriately a peer? A peer is generally someone who is at your classification or ranked more highly, and tenure-track faculty are always considered appropriate peer reviewers for non-tenure-track faculty. Then beyond that, if you're given a list of people from whom to choose, it probably depends on a rotation and making sure that the assignments are more or less equitably distributed over a range of faculty. So if you are an unpromoted non-tenure track faculty member, it will probably be someone who is one rank higher than you, but it could conceivably, depending on the constitution of your unit, be someone who is at the same rank as you are. It would be preferable if it were someone who were one rank higher, because we don't want to put people in vulnerable positions in a situation where they're reviewing somebody else on potentially sensitive material, and presumably someone who is one rank higher or more will have a good understanding of what you could be doing better, what you're already doing well. Did that answer your question, Laura? Okay. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Per contract period. Yep, well, all of the numerical ones, so your unit, your department will be responsible for producing those sheets, those charts of your numerical student evaluations and all the signed narrative evaluations. Yes, so the number of sets of student evaluations will depend on your teaching load, right? Right, so your colleague is making the point that we need to think about how much those student evaluations weigh against or with a peer evaluation. And I would say that, for one thing, it's something you can take up in your policy development if you wish. But a more global comment is that it will depend on the kind of teaching you're doing. We know both quantitatively and qualitatively that you are likely to get lower numerical evaluations in certain kind of courses than others, right? Gen Ed courses versus big lecture courses versus small seminar courses versus things in which you are an expert and they're upper division or graduate. Each of those comes with a relatively predictable distribution of grades, so it's much harder to get straight fives in a lecture section with 200 students than it might be in a specialized seminar with 12. So this will be the job of both the committee and the department head to give a context for those numerical evaluations and the student written evaluations as well. It's the job of the committee and then of the department head or dean to give those of us beyond the department a sense of how to understand those numbers. And I don't think we can do an algorithm saying, you know, there's 8 sets of numerical evaluations and 1 letter, it's 8 against 1. I think that's a faulty arithmetic. I think they need to be weighed appropriately given the kind of assignment you have. I think my colleague Ken Doxey might want to jump in on this one. Ken's point, I hope you all heard it. I want to repeat the essence of it for our recording of this, is that it's the job of the committee and the unit and the dean and the department head to allow us to understand those evaluations in context, to give us a way of reading them, especially if there is a discrepancy. You may have a very strong peer evaluation and you may have numerical scores that fall at or below the norm for your unit. It's up to an informed department head or unit head with a synthetic view to tell us why that makes sense. You were going to say something.
About the numerical score.
Yes. That's a really good question. How many of those categories, those questions on a numerical evaluation show up in the report? Ken, can you help me with that one? Yeah, how you do peer reviews, who does peer reviews is certainly part of the policy development that you are reviewing even now. And just to speak again into the microphone what Jane and Ken said, Jane said you might want to consider as you're building your unit policy which of those questions you want to go forward in the report. You know, maybe you have 15 questions that all your students answer. Maybe it really is only a subset of those that are important for evaluating faculty. And Ken said that the registrar's office prepares a report that includes the numerical evaluations for all questions asked. That's how they come forward. And I think you might want to consider in your individual units whether you want all of them to go forward or not. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to this slide. So the review process must include an opportunity for the individual to discuss his or her performance with a supervisor. So you can't just receive a written evaluation in your box, whether it's your electronic inbox or your department mailbox telling you how that evaluation came out. You are entitled to discuss this in a one-to-one conversation with your supervisor. So I encourage you to do that because that conversation can be very productive and can be very helpful in contextualizing the written report so that you can ask questions about it or understand where you are vis-a-vis your colleagues, or again that question of where does this put you on a trajectory towards successful promotion. So that one-on-one conversation can be a very useful interaction. It's also a great moment just to check in with the person you report to. So it's a really useful exercise among colleagues, and it can give you a whole lot more information. The evaluation of professional development activities must take into account availability of support. So, for example, if it is a requirement that you, I'm making this up off the top of my head, that you attend one conference a year in your field, That has to be written into the expectations and duties of your position. And with any luck, there should also be some provision of funds to help you get there. That won't always be the case, but once again, we can't hold you to account on something which we haven't asked you specifically to do, okay, and accounted for, even if it's only in time off. If you need to go to a conference, perhaps your department wants to write a policy that explains how your course will be covered while you're there. There needs to be provision for you to do what you're going to be evaluated on. So that's various kinds of support, various kinds of opportunities. Maybe you're in a field where your national association meets in Singapore every 3 years. So somehow the list of criteria need to accommodate for the periodic nature of that meeting and its far-flung locale, and it has to be reasonable. There needs to be a logical and reasonable expectation that you can fulfill that requirement. And lastly, and this is what we've been saying over and over, faculty members will be evaluated only on criteria approved and made available. So what you're writing up, your version, your local version of those criteria right now are going to be really important in how you yourselves perhaps will be evaluated and everyone who comes through behind you in subsequent years. Any questions on this particular slide before we move on? Yes. You're asking about the professional development activities. That will be defined in your assignment of professional duties and responsibilities. So however your unit is defining those. In some units it may be 0.2 of your FTE on a full-time appointment. In other units it may be different than that. Okay, so now we're moving on to promotion reviews, unless anybody has any other questions on contract reviews. Anybody want to go back to contract reviews? Okay, so my guess is that this is probably what is of greatest interest to many of you in the room. So first of all, again, as a parallel with the tenure-related faculty ladder of promotion, eligibility is defined as 6 years of service at an average of 0.4 FTE or greater. And that means if you're on a 9-month contract, a regular academic year contract, you can use only those 3 terms in the academic year, fall, winter, spring. Summer won't count for you if you are generally a 9-month academic year employee. If you are a 12-month employee, you can accumulate that average at 4 terms per academic year on a 12-month contract. Okay, so this is actually a pretty generous provision. You can be less than half-time and still be eligible for promotion. And that's a recognition of the variability of the teaching assignments in many of our units, the fact that that people have split responsibilities and split professional lives where they do things other than teach for us, but there is continuity to their positions. They've been classified as career. Their contribution to the unit and the curriculum is very important, and therefore we make eligible for promotion anybody who's got that 0.4 FTE or greater on average over 6 years. We covered, yes? That's a really good question, Megan. So the question was, does this go back to the service you had already provided on an adjunct contract, or does it have to be while you're in the career NTTF designation? And that is something where we are in a gray zone and where my policy is to default to the generous on that one for a couple of reasons. First of all, if someone has already accrued long years of service on an adjunct contract and kept being renewed over and over and over again, that means inherently that there was some ongoing nature to that appointment. And I think that should be recognized. Moreover, last year, as you know, we did that very sweeping initiative that was required by the Memo of Understanding appended to the collective bargaining agreement, where we looked at all adjunct positions, and anyone who was in their 3rd year or longer had their position considered for reclassification to career. We said specifically in that memorandum of understanding that if you were one of the people whose position was reclassified in that large process, in that first initial sweep, we would count your years of service as an adjunct towards the years towards promotion. It would be a deep unfairness not to do that for other people whose positions were not reclassified as part of that memo of understanding, but who, say, for no fault or decision of their own, had been reclassified just beforehand, or who may be reclassified now. So what I would want to see is, first of all, conversation between the faculty member and his or her immediate supervisor, and then have that written into the file as it comes up along the line. In other words, for example, to make up a hypothetical, this instructor is in her 3rd year as a career instructor, but served for 9 years before that on an adjunct contract, and we would like to consider that prior service as part of the years accumulated for eligibility. I think that, for me, that would be absolutely no question that you would meet the eligibility requirements. We may need to do some individual meetings with department heads or with deans to discuss those cases, because that's not actually written down that way anywhere. But from my point of view, that is the generous and reasonable interpretation, and I will come and speak to any department head or dean who would like to speak with me about that. Okay? So that is the approach that I'm taking to it, Megan, and I think we've got pretty broad acceptance of that as a principle. Yes? After a while, this won't be an issue anymore, after we've moved through this transition phase. So you may not want to enshrine it in great detail in your department document. You could put in one statement saying, for people who have accrued considerable service in adjunct positions and are now career, their years of service may be taken into account. I would put something open-ended and suggestive in your document, perhaps. It's just a suggestion. You can write it up as you choose. But you could make a nod towards it, and presumably in about 5 years that will no longer be an issue. Okay? Any other questions on this point? That was a really good question, and I'm really glad that it was raised. Okay, we've said about the upper out. So upper out is applicable to librarians, but to no other classification of NTTF. That means that promotion for everybody but librarians is elective and optional. And employment can continue at current rank if your unit continues to have a need for the services you offer and if your performance is satisfactory. So if we think about the consequences of that decision, that promotion is not required, it is optional, there are various different sort of trickle-down effects of that decision. One is that contract renewal has to be done much more seriously than we have done it in the past. I've said as much in about 40 minutes ago, but I want to say it again. We need to make really clear-eyed, very objective, very thorough decisions about whether someone's performance is satisfactory, non-satisfactory, better than satisfactory, superlative, and why. The why is what you're attaching criteria to right now. When we make those contract renewals, if someone has been satisfactory but not more than that over a period of 6 years, that may not be a profile that fits the criteria that we're currently establishing for merit towards promotion. And this speaks to point number 3. Promotion is not purely for longevity of service. I think, again, if you think about the parallel with what has been done in the academy for many, many decades for tenure-related faculty, this will make more sense. We know that there is a real difference in the kind of work, that the quality not meaning good or bad, but meaning the sort of work and the degree of leadership that goes with seniority. As you gain seniority, presumably you get better at things and you know more and you become experts in particular areas. We know that associate professors work differently than assistant professors do. It's not a question of adding more hours. In many cases, that would be impossible, both in the non-tenure ranks and in the tenured ranks. It's not a question of time invested. It's a question of the kind of profile you have developed. What we can expect from somebody who is promoted, whether tenured or non-tenure track, is, well, you're going to have to put words to this. Luckily, I do not. But as you develop your policies, you're going to have to figure out what it is. It will be either outstanding service. Say you're in the math department and you teach 4 parallel sections of the same math course every term. You'd better have shown that you're really very, very, very good at that particular course by the time you want to come up for promotion. You should excel. You should, at that point, be mentoring others in how to teach that course. You might have taken on a leadership role in developing syllabi or assessing materials for that course. You will somehow take ownership of that piece of what you're responsible for. In some departments and units, there's more flexibility for people to develop their own particular profiles. So in my department, my home department is Romance Languages. Early on, one of the chairs the chair who hired me said, "Barbara, we expect everyone to become a specialist in something they're interested in. You may all teach 5 courses and you may have to teach over the whole curriculum, but by the time you come up for promotion, I want you to know study abroad inside out and backwards, or I want you to know participatory learning experience opportunities inside out and backwards, or I want you to have become a program advisor for the Office of International Affairs, or. And it's similar. In my department, we have that kind of opportunity because we've got a broad range of programs and a lot of people and a lot of work that needs to be done, and not everybody can be an expert in everything. Or you've become a crackerjack advisor. You're one of our lead advisors. There are more limited opportunities in other units, but the point is, by the time you've been doing something for 6 years, you should be doing it differently than a brand new person coming in for the first time. And our challenge is to articulate how to say that in our promotion criteria now. Karen. I think that is up to the individual unit. You know, when we were doing earlier policy development for merit criteria, for criteria for merit raises, for example, we talked about how many grades or levels of achievement we might identify and required at least 3. Satisfactory, non-satisfactory, better than satisfactory. A lot of units went further and ended up with 5 or even more distinctions. And I think one of your charges now is to figure out where somebody needs to land in what portions of their job to meet that criterion of a distinctive profile that would merit promotion. And would be very different in different units, so I hesitate even to use any more examples. You could decide that satisfactory in the bulk of one's duties and responsibilities is good enough for promotion. But to me, that would indicate that, well, I don't know, are you continuing to hire people who are not satisfactory in some of them? I think not. I think this is one of those ineffable questions of leadership, citizenship, investment of seriousness of purpose that we know when we see it, but it's really hard to describe in writing. Does anybody want to offer any wording that perhaps you've already thought of or worked out that helps us determine what would make somebody promotable as opposed to someone who could continue to be hired as an unpromoted NTTF? Karen. I challenge your distinction between standard of excellence and satisfactory. You can be satisfactory at maintaining a standard of excellence. Does that answer it? Okay, there it is. Okay, sir.
I think an easier way is to say meets expectations rather than
Yeah.
satisfactory.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we have to maintain standards of excellence. And so what we're saying, has someone met that expectation, exceeded that expectation, or not, or failed to meet that expectation? I think that's a useful semantic difference and might help clarify it. So this is a point on which we could easily spend the entire day. And we've had, I see knowing smiles, yes, and I expect perhaps some of you have spent an entire day or more. We spent a long time discussing this with deans a couple of weeks ago. And we also had some confirmation from one of our colleagues who was associated with the negotiations for the first collective bargaining agreement, that in fact, as a principle, not necessarily of United Academics here locally, but as a principle of best practices in the field, we really do want to maintain this distinction between what kind of performance is promotable and what kind of performance allows one to continue, because it's in the best interests of the development, the professional development of individual faculty and of a cohort. So it really is a pretty crucial distinction, and I think it will become easier for us to wrap our minds around that as we develop this policy, articulate those criteria, and do it for a few rounds. I think 5 years from now this discussion will be meaningless. We will all know it and have internalized it. Other comments or questions on this point? Yes. Where does the service credit? Oh, for prior service? Oh, we'll get to that, and that's an excellent question. So the easy answer, and you'll see this in a subsequent slide, is now and from here on out, credit for prior service will have to be negotiated at the time of hire. We didn't do that systematically before this. So at the moment, we've got some instances where people came with really considerable and impressive prior service, and we are negotiating those on a one-by-one discussion basis. So right now, it's something that needs to happen with every hire, but we haven't done it consistently, so I'm prepared to look at that on a case-by-case basis. Okay? It's a bit like the previous question about can years of service as an adjunct count. This is also negotiable for the individual at the moment until we're past the period of transition. One very quick comment, the last bullet point on this slide, accelerated review. Just like for tenure-track faculty, it is possible to make the case for an accelerated promotion review, but it has to be an exceptional file. It's not just taking into account that prior service took place at another institution beforehand. We'll have that discussion and determine how much prior service should count. But if, say, just as for the simplest hypothetical, if we hire someone as a brand new instructor and 4 years out, the department and the individual want to make the case that this person deserves promotion 2 years before the timeline would normally allow, that file has to be exceptional in some way. Okay, just like it is for early promotion from assistant to associate professor on the tenure line. All right? And they happen. So I'm not saying that they can't happen, but there needs to be a pretty darn good justification for it. Speeding right along. Okay, here it is. There's the credit for prior service. So now, according to our new hiring and contract conventions, that is determined at time of hire. And it can be flexible, but what will be considered, just like in the way we look at tenure cases for someone who came in with prior service, it's 6 years as a body of work that will be considered for promotion. And if we've made an agreement right now that 2 of those years will be for your service at OSU or somewhere else across the state or the country, then it'll be those 6 years of service that will count towards the review for promotion. Multiple or joint appointments, again, we're getting much better at that. Now those The expectations have to be specified at time of hire. We have not done that consistently or well in the past. So if you are in a joint appointment, if you have multiple hires, if you want to figure out how all the pieces will fit together now before it's articulated in your contract, again, we'll discuss those on a case-by-case basis, but I feel that they should be handled with logic and generosity, so we're not penalizing someone for having been split across more than one appointment. Yes, John? Yes, thank you. Yes, it has to maintain the same FTE level. Yep. Okay, and finally, initiating the promotion practice. And here we're still in a transition year where we're not going to hold to the letter of the CBA because we don't want to disadvantage someone who has been here and simply failed to point out to his or her department last year that they want to come up. So the CBA states that an NTTF who is coming up for promotion, who is ready, must flag to his or her immediate supervisor the year before the process would happen that she wants to come up. So if the process is going to happen in year 6, while you're finishing up the accrual of those 6 years, you would have to flag it in your 5th year and say, I'd like to come up for promotion next year, and have that conversation with your dean or your department head. So that the review can be carried out in year 6. This year, given that this is all still very, very new and we're still finding our ways into the new habits, there's still time this fall, potentially, that you could say, hey, I'm eligible and I really want to come up. Can we still do it this year? It may be just the load of work this year is just crushing, as you know. We are doing about 16 things beyond the normal business of everyday university life. So it may actually not be possible. In some units where there's a huge backlog of people ready to come up for promotion, they're simply having to say, by seniority, we will do the first 4 this year, the second 4 next year, the third 4 the year after, simply to keep workloads within some definition of reasonable. So this is a discussion you'll have to have with your immediate supervisor if you find that by the end of this year you're going to have met that 6 years and you still want to try to come up for promotion now. There are a couple of dates associated with that. We need the file in our office by April 15th, 2015 in order to get a decision out through the provost's office on the promotion case by the end of this academic year. If we need it by April 15th, your school or college will need it before that, and they are setting their own internal deadlines. I don't want to misspeak, but I think in CAS it's March 15th because Jane, is that right? March 1st? Maybe March 1st? Don't take my word for it. Check with your department head who will check with the dean. But obviously, because there's a dean's letter that needs to be added, the file needs to move from your department into the dean's office at a certain point before the 15th of April, well before, so that the dean can add his or her recommendation and get it to us by the 15th of April. We will continue to read files and make recommendations on them and prepare them for the provost's office after the 15th of April. We just can't guarantee that we can get a final decision from the provost by the end of the academic year if it hits us later than that. But I was reviewing files over the summer. I will continue to review files over the summer and get them to the provost as quickly as possible. So it's a rolling basis. But for example, we would love to recognize you and honor you at the end of the year party that recognizes NTTF promotion. That'll be in early June 2nd. So again, that would be a wonderful culmination to your academic year. And if you get them to us by the 15th of April, we will undertake to make sure you know whether you get invited to the party. Okay? Any questions on that process? Okay. Okay, so here's what the candidate has to submit. There's a very clear list, and it's all in Article 19, of what the individual has to prepare and what his or her immediate supervisor has to prepare, and then on up the line. So the candidate has to produce a CV, up to date, according to best practices in your particular field. It differs from field to field. and also a personal statement. And in some fields, that may feel odd. That may be something that you never have to produce in any other aspect of your professional life. But we need to hear from you about your trajectory through those 6 years of time you have served. What have you learned? What have you done? What has your approach been? Where are you now compared with where you were when you came in as a newcomer? How have you met the duties and responsibilities expected of you? What are you going to take forward? Because promotion is something that means you don't just stagger across a particular line. It means you're on full flight and continuing to develop your professional life. So what are your future plans? What have you got in the works? All of that is in the personal statement, and it's equally applicable to creative activity or to teaching, in some cases to research. So it should only be about the things that you're actually being paid to do, right? Do not feel obliged to speak about research if that's not part of your job. If you're an artist, if you're teaching studio classes, talk about that as your primary responsibility. So by all means, tailor it to what you've been hired to do. And you should think about, because you will have the list in hand, how your contributions measure up against the criteria that your unit has established. And don't forget that as of the institution of the collective bargaining agreement, we are also asking you to write about your contributions to institutional equity and inclusion. And that is something that we're all learning to do, because not many of us included that in statements prior to last year. It can take innumerable forms. It doesn't mean anything in particular. It can be any way in which you promote equity and inclusion, whether it's on an international level, whether it's with a particular population, whether it's your advising approach to particular student constituencies. There are as many different ways of contributing to equity and inclusion as there are people in this room, and then well beyond that. So we're going to have some wide-ranging conversations and a lot of thinking about the many things that legitimately fall into that category. Don't be cowed by it. My guess is when you start to look at how you accommodate learners of different sorts, people with different learning styles, you really are doing this work already, and we just need to figure out how to articulate it. Jane? Yes, so to repeat into the microphone what Jane just said, there's actually a document that discusses this in very helpful terms that was developed by the Office of the Vice President for Equity and Inclusion, Vice President Yvette Alex Asenso. And we link to it on the Academic Affairs website page, but she also has it on her webpage, so you can look at the Equity and Inclusion website and you'll find those guidelines either on our page or on hers. Sir, did you have a question at the far back? No? Okay. Yes. The service will be defined by your unit document, okay? And you can't be held as responsible for anything that's not specified in that document, although you may choose to go well beyond that and then speak about it and raise that as something that you do in addition to the duties for which you're being paid. By all means, include anything you're doing that goes over and beyond. But what we can hold you responsible for is only what we say you're going to be evaluated on. Okay? Okay, so beyond your CV and your personal statement, you will do a teaching portfolio as applicable, a scholarship portfolio if you are being paid to do scholarship, service portfolio. That is however your service function is defined in your job description and by the criteria that your unit is drawing up now. Same thing with your professional activities portfolio. If you're an artist, if you're an architect, if you're a vocalist, if you're an actor, you'll want to give us details about those activities that you participate in and have accomplished. And for those where we require external reviews, you will submit a list of potential qualified external reviewers. But that will be in a very small subset of cases and only almost, I was going to say only in research positions. I suppose there is a case that I could imagine where you might need external reviews in other NTTF classifications, but if so, you will know that well ahead of time, and you will have an opportunity to provide potential reviewers to your department. Yes, ma'am. No, I don't believe it has. So refer to your library document. Yeah, I think they are still required for librarians. You're right. And I should start adding that to my special list. Thank you. Okay, so one of the things that has not always been in promotion files and that needs to be there now is your statement of whether you are agreeing to waive access to the materials in your file or whether you are retaining the right to read the evaluations in your file. We absolutely always require them in tenure-track promotion cases. We will now always absolutely require them in non-tenure-track promotion files. So there is a standard form with which you will be provided. You should have an opportunity to discuss this with your immediate supervisor, and you can choose to waive all right, i.e. I will never ask to look at my evaluations, or you can retain the right to look at them. Susan.
I was talking to some of the NTTF in my department, and we looked at the CDA, and it says that the departmental review committee report and the department head's report must be presented and discussed and signed. And so then the people up for review wanted to know why should they sign a waiver since they're already going to see it.
Susan's point is that as the CBA specifies, the person up for promotion has the right to see, the non-tenure track faculty member up for promotion has the right to see the committee report and the chair's report as well, or dean if you're in a unit that doesn't have a chair. Those are open to you and you must see them. In the case, for example, of a research file where there are external letters, that would be one place where the waiver would be important, whether you waive the right to see those or whether you retain the right to see those. So I think that's the distinction. That's probably most salient. Okay? Melanie. Mm-hmm. Yes, so Melanie's question is, she has submitted a waiver and you've waived your right to see letters of evaluation. You still get to see the committee report and the chair's recommendation. That's the way it's written in the CBA. Yes, ma'am. The question is, why would you choose to waive your right to see the letters or choose to retain the right to see the letters? There's a lot of different theories on this. I think the conventional wisdom may differ somewhat from field to field. One of the bottom line explanations, one of the most common explanations, is that often reviewers will feel constrained in their comments if they know that the candidate has the right to see the letter. Some people will refuse to write if they know that the candidate has the right to see the letter. So there's a basic assumption that letters will be more complete and more balanced if they are kept confidential. That's not necessarily true, and that whole process may be budging a little bit, but it is still a common perception and a common understanding. It may be that what you do is really controversial, and you may be redefining your field, and you may be in a polemic with other people in your area, in which case you want to make sure that your file is not trashed by somebody who holds a different ideological or political position on something, for example. So you might want to build in that kind of safeguard. Again, I think there are probably as many individual situations as there are applicants in the room. If you do not anticipate, if you cannot expect that there's going to be an issue, then I think I can say this safely, that the majority of applicants for promotion waive their right, but you are under no pressure to do so. So your supervisor should not try to sway you one way or the other. There should be a factual, sort of objective conversation about the advantages and disadvantages of both options, and then you should make an informed decision in consultation with your direct supervisor. Okay? Okay. Okay. Any other questions on that point? Yes, Amy. Well, the dean's recommendation, for example, any other supplementary material that comes in. If you were a officer of research, those external letters from people outside the institution. So this will be more pertinent in some files than in others. But it's a good question, and it builds on the questions that just before it, too. Any other questions on that point? Boy, it's warm in here. If you need to get up and get coffee or water, please do. I wonder if there's a chance of opening a door to get a little air in here. Pardon me? Deb is saying it's the only warm place on campus today. Yes, that's true. And again, notice of meeting, there is every expectation and every reason to think that you ought to be discussing this with your immediate supervisor. And in fact, if that immediate supervisor needs to meet with you, insists on meeting with you, you must be given 3 days' notice so that you can't ever be expected to go in unprepared to such a meeting. And you are also allowed to bring a colleague or a union representative as an observer. That person does not participate in the meeting, but will be an extra set of ears. It's a bit like taking an advocate with you to a doctor's appointment. It's so that you have another set of ears processing the information with whom you can then consult after the fact. So you need to be given 3 days' notice, and you have the right to bring someone with you. Yes? Ooh, very good question. Deb, do you know the answer to that? Oh, yes. You know, I think I didn't hear the tail end of your sentence. I'm sorry. This is not just about the waiver conversation. This is about any conversation that you have with your direct supervisor about your promotion case. Yeah, right. Yeah, thank you. I just didn't hear the end. Thanks. Yes. Mm-hmm. I regret using that colloquial term. I beg your pardon. No. It goes if they were to submit something unsolicited, it might either be eliminated immediately or it would be relegated to an additional materials section of the file that does not bear the same weight or have anywhere near the same impact. Mm-hmm.
So if we can get beat up by slipping a letter in there.
That won't happen. Yeah, no, I'm trying to remember. I don't want to misspeak without going back to the text of the CBA, but you can't get a letter that wasn't requested by the official parties weighing in on this. Sometimes unsolicited material comes in. I think in a tenure case, we stick it in a supplementary file, but I don't think it's given any weight in the consideration. So we haven't written it in, okay. But it would be relegated immediately to something outside the core documents, okay? Yes. Well, it's the job of your department head to challenge and contextualize anything like that comes in. And in fact, he or she can simply eliminate it from the file. So if it were ever to be even in a supplementary, secondary, tertiary piece of the file, it would have to be heavily explained and contextualized. But, you know, it doesn't happen often, and when it does, those things are generally just eliminated from the conversation because they were unsolicited. Okay, we can talk about that more. I can understand it as an area of concern. Yes, ma'am. Okay, Good point. So the question was, so you know it's your job to flag to your immediate supervisor that you want to come up for promotion. And then the question is, what happens from there? So Jane, if you have more information for me, let me know. Do you? Okay, you're puzzling? All right. Okay, yes, it is complicated.
From the department. Yeah. And it's in Jane, it's in the section about the dean. Right, I see that. Yeah. There's something that.
I'll tell you what, we'll have this as a sidebar and then Ken, what were you going to say? Yeah, that's useful, Evan. That's useful experience. Thank you. So to get back to your question, so you say, hello, I'm going to be eligible for promotion. Can we go ahead next year? Your unit head says yes. And then, according to the procedures that you've established in your governance documents and in your process and criteria for promotion, the following year, year 6 or subsequent to that, the committee will be charged. Your department will have a mechanism by which a committee is established to review promotion files. You will be prompted according to your internal timeline by what date you need to provide the CV and the statement and all the other bits as applicable. And the department will have on its annual year cycle when that file will be reviewed, when it goes up to the dean, and then when it comes to us in academic affairs. So every unit will have its own internal timelines for that, and part of that conversation that says, yes, let's go ahead and put you up for promotion is, and here's when you're going to need to get me these things. Yes, that's right. And your department as a whole will have established those chronologies and those timelines. They may differ from year to year depending on how many cases there are, for example, but your internal governance documents will have specified the makeup of the committee that will review those files, for example. So some of that work is already done. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay. So here are the other things that are part of the file, but that the individual is not responsible for. These are the things that your department or school and college have to provide. They need to include in the file a statement of duties and responsibilities so that everybody at every level can make sure you're being assessed according to what you were hired to do. Conditions of appointment, in other words, FTE, what kind of a contract you're on, what your classification is, what your current rank is, what your salary is, all the stuff that comes on your contract. The criteria for promotion, which you are in the process of revising or developing even now. The candidate materials, so all the CV, the statement, the other portfolio work, all of that goes in. Supervisors' letters of evaluation. If applicable, those external reviews. Then the committee report. Then after the committee reports, the entire group of faculty eligible to vote on a particular promotion case has to meet and vote, and that information needs to be in the file. And then the department head or dean needs to do an independent review. And that means that his or her recommendation can be different than the one that comes out of the committee and out of the department. So that unit head, its immediate superior, is charged with reviewing the file independently and making her or his own recommendation on it. It's not supposed to just mirror what the faculty said. It's supposed to contextualize the file, read it against the landscape of the particular unit, and make an independent recommendation for or against. Okay? We have, by the way, beautiful binders that we send out to units who request these things. They say, we're putting X up for promotion next year. We send them a physical binder that has all of the tabs in it so that every file looks the same when it comes to us. And it's Ken's responsibility and noble duty to look at those files, because he's looked at so many hundreds of them that he can do this quickly and efficiently. He looks at them to make sure that every piece of it that has to be in there is in there, that every piece has been done appropriately, and he clears it to move forward. So from Ken it goes to me. And we're moving to digital files, which is, I bet, what you were going to say, yes? So we're trying to cut down on the cumbersome aspects of this and begin to move towards a paperless process. We've got a couple of units, I think, that have agreed to be guinea pigs on the electronic files, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, so all of that happens. All of the decisions and recommendations are made in your unit, and what happens then? Well, as I've said, it needs to get to us in academic affairs by April the 15th of 2015 in order to have us assure an answer from the provost by the end of the academic year, and that means that there will be different and much earlier internal deadlines to your school and college and within your department. So every file gets 3 levels of review, just like with a tenure-related file. So if you don't have a department head, if you go immediately to a dean, it will, let me see, how do we do that? I have to think this through. Ken, I might need your help here. If it's an associate dean who reads the file, then it comes to me, comes through you, it comes to me, and I make a recommendation, and then the provost makes the final decision. In some cases, there are 4 levels of review because I make a recommendation on every file. In some instances, when it's a research file, it passes through the Office of Research and is assessed there, and they add a level of review as well. So instructional files come directly to academic affairs after they leave the school or college, and research files go first through the Office of Research for an independent review there. Yes? The question is, if you're split between 2 departments or even among 3 departments, God forbid, where does the locus of that evaluation happen? These days, with every new hire, that will be specified as of the hire. Now it needs to be worked out in cooperation among or between the department heads or deans involved. So as soon as you declare your desire to come up, I would expect your immediate supervisor to pick up the phone or send an email and say, we want to bring this person up for promotion. Let's talk about who's going to contribute what. We need to make sure that she is evaluated in all aspects of her job. Okay? Yeah, you would let both supervisors know, and then it's their job to figure out how they're going to do that in collaboration with one another. Yeah. Okay, so speeding right along, it leaves your department, it leaves your school, it goes through a vice president, a dean, or a director. It then ends up in academic affairs or first in the Office for Research and Innovation, and then comes to me. And I review the file once Ken has told me it is complete and in accordance with the requirements. I make a recommendation, and then we physically carry it over to the provost's office with everything in place, and then the provost reviews the file and renders a final decision. The candidate is notified in writing. At the same time, we notify the direct supervisor and all the other people who have provided recommendations along the line. Actually, that's not quite true. It's the department head, the dean. They get copies, as does the president. And the provost knows what she wrote, so she will no doubt keep a copy too. But all the way up the chain, we provide letters of that, copies of that letter, and they generally all go out at the same time. So your letter will be sitting in your box, and your department head, if she or he opens it first, will give you a call if he or she is vigilant and say, go look in your box, go look in your box. Okay, but the point is you have to be notified in writing, because this is a very significant employment benchmark, and so we will notify you in writing. Okay, we are virtually at the end, except that I want to tell you that new rank will apply with the next contract. So generally speaking, if you're promoted by the end of the academic year, you will be promoted and you will get your 8% raise as of the next contract. If you are unsuccessful for promotion, if your case is returned with a negative decision, you can come up again after waiting 3 years or more. So you must wait 3 more years. You can wait longer than that if you wish to. And as long as your department or unit still needs your services and your performance is deemed satisfactory, you can be kept on in an unpromoted capacity during that time. You can withdraw an application if something changes, if you thought better of it, if something arises unexpectedly, that file can be withdrawn at any time until the provost makes the final decision. At that point, then you wouldn't have to wait another 3 years. You could come up the next year, for example. Okay? Those are very rare. I've only seen a couple of them happen, and I don't think any NTTF files. I think I've seen it happen in 1 or 2 cases with tenure-track files. Okay, and here's your resource list. So this will be available, the PowerPoint will be up on our website very quickly. There's a reference and a link to your collective bargaining agreement so that if you haven't yet memorized Article 19, you can go off and do that now. You have my email and my phone number, as well as Ken's, as well as Jane's. So any one of us can help you with questions on this at any time. And you feel free to write to all 3 of us, and whoever gets to it first will reply and copy everybody else. We will undertake to give you accurate, consistent answers to these questions. We often check in with each other first just to make sure that we understand something the same way. You should absolutely be getting the same answer to every question from everybody involved. And if you aren't, let us know, because we need to fix something or have a conversation. We have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions, and I would love to entertain anything you'd like to know. Sir.
So in the materials submitted by the unit, one of the bullet points was supervisor's letters of evaluation. So presumably those are from the years preceding the year which is being reviewed. Or do I have to do a letter of evaluation and also then turn around and write some independent review recommendations?
I think you're accurate in saying it would be for previous years, because as we said, one review will do it in a given year. No, you wouldn't need to do both a supervisor's letter and an independent review of the file. That would be overkill. Yes?
What if there's not much documentation from
Yes, what a good question. The question is, what if there isn't a lot of documentation about previous years at this point? And that may be the case for some of you who come up now, next year, and the next couple of years, because we haven't done this systematically. If there is not a lot of documentation, it puts that much greater weight on the current evaluations. And there must absolutely be everything that's needed for this year, so a peer visit, for example. I think we would never hold back a case if you've accrued the necessary time simply because that documentation didn't exist. We will go forward with what there is, and it simply means that the documents that are prepared specifically for the promotion process need to be that much more careful and thorough because they have less to go on, to build on. But it won't be an impediment to it going forward. Okay? There was... Yes? This gentleman is providing an excellent example of the kinds of things that the direct supervisor needs to take into account. That's exactly right. If you don't have all the documentation that one would expect, then it's up to the person to explain that and say, so to compensate, we're doing this, or accordingly, we did this very thoroughly. So it should come up in the department head or unit head's letter with an explanation and a justification of why this file should go forward anyway. Thank you. Yes?
Are there mechanisms set up to notify the employee that they're up for promotion, or is that their responsibility?
It is their responsibility. This is one place where the mechanism differs for tenure-related faculty and for non-tenure-related faculty, because tenure-related faculty will lose their jobs if they don't get promoted at the first rank, the first promotion. It is the unit's responsibility to signal to the tenure-related assistant professor that she or he needs to come up. In this case, because it's not required and it's not up or out, it is the responsibility of the individual to flag that or to ask the question. You can go to your department manager and say, I think I've accrued the necessary time. Could you please help me do the calculations? But the onus is on the person who wants to come up if she or he is non-tenure track. Okay? Amy. That would be fine. So again, it's part of you don't have to duplicate reviews. So if you were reviewed last spring and the files being put together this fall or in the winter, then that letter will be the most recent one. It'd be great if the department could muster the staffing to do another review, but it may not happen, and that's fine. Okay, ma'am. Yes, sorry, I've had my back to you the whole time. I apologize.
It's a quick question. In my personal statement, what period of time should I cover? Because I was promoted a couple of times already, so since the previous promotion or prior to that, if I've been working here like for 20 years in university, for example, there are all
Yes.
different type of procedures and things, registered, not registered. It was complete mess many years ago. So, which year should I cover? So I can get the answer to this simple question. All 20 years.
I will undertake to give you a very good answer to this question. So this senior colleague has been here long enough that she has experienced the inconsistencies and the gaps in our documentation and evaluations over the years. Her question is, what period of time should she consider in her personal statement? It's the same as what you're going to be evaluated on, which is the last 6 years or since the last promotion. Okay? Okay. Now, good. I hope we settled that one. Yes? Sure. This is a question about the goals for review and promotion.
It mentions areas of excellence and also areas of need for improvement. In review, should all instructors or all faculty have some area of improvement? Is that necessary? Is that a necessary expectation at all?
You know, that's a question that had never occurred to me, but it's a really great question. The question is, does a review have to point out areas where improvement might be made or needs to be made? I would say no. It's very possible that somebody is firing on all syllables, is excelling in every aspect of her job, and so there is not a requirement. It's not like we're filling in a rubric and one of the categories says areas for improvement. We're not working on that kind of a rubric. So if there are no areas where improvement is needed, it doesn't need to be created for the sake of the review.
And then if there are areas of improvement, how does that factor into reviews? If one shows improvement in that area, is that a bonus on the review or?
Are you trained as a lawyer? Okay. Very systematic thinking coming from this woman. Okay, so the point is, what do you do with a section that lays out areas for improvement in reviews that come along down the line? I think if one would be required to say, last year we flagged as an area for improvement these particular points. This year our finding is that this instructor has improved enormously on all things mentioned. There is progress in 2 of these 3 areas. We still want some work done on X. We're still concerned about all 3 of these, and if these are not met, I don't want to suggest that we should put implicit threats in the review, but if there's been no improvement in those areas, it should be stated quite clearly, because that might lead to non-renewal if it were to happen again after the person has had the opportunity to improve. Great. So if you can apply this immediately, so much the better. That's great. Yes? No, there is no salary increase mandated with the contract renewal. Those will be part of the regular routine of salary increases for all faculty, but there is that minimum bump upon promotion on each of the promotions, so from first rank to second rank, and then again from second to third rank. The astute question from the lady at this table is, Barbara, you said minimum 8%. Could it be more than 8%? In theory, it could be more than 8%. There may be internal guidelines that dictate when one might go more than 8%. I will tell you that I have yet to see anything more than 8%. That's a pretty enormous raise in the context of this institution. So it should be thought about at the individual unit level. I think it will be infrequent at best. Okay? Yes?
You mentioned that there are 3 levels of rank.
Yes.
Can you describe what the third one is? Because
Sure.
we want to talk about 1 to 1 to 2.
You're quite right. So for every classification of non-tenure track faculty, just like for the tenure track faculty, there are 3 ranks. So if you're an instructor, there's instructor, senior instructor 1, senior instructor 2. If you're a research assistant, senior research assistant 1, senior research assistant 2. If you're a research professor, there's assistant research professor, associate research professor, full research professor. If you're a lecturer, senior lecturer 1, senior lecturer 2. Which ones haven't I thought about? Give me another example. Librarians. Thank you. I really value you keeping me honest about keeping those librarians in there. Librarian, I think it's associate librarian and senior librarian. Yes, right. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, everything we've said about the first promotion pertains to the second promotion too. So another 6 years of service at 0.4 or greater FTE on average. The process is exactly the same for each of the 2 promotions. Okay? Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes?
Going up for your promotion of 6 years of service, do you have to be a senior instructor or senior level?
Say that again, Laura?
Do you have to be at the senior level before you can develop a file for promotion? Or is that what we've been talking about? From
Yes.
1 to 2 is what
We've been talking about mostly from 1 to 2, but everything is the same from 2 to 3. So once you're in the mid-rank, you need another 6 years of service at 0.4 FTE or greater at senior instructor 1, and then you can come up for senior instructor 2. So the whole thing happens twice. At the back of the room. Yes, sir. I don't want to misspeak about this. Yes, it does. I need to zip back to my CBA, but I think that was across the board. I think it's 4 one-year contracts and then movement to 2-year contracts. Yeah. Yes.
On the slide you showed that had the list of different portfolios. I'm wondering, what are you referring to, a physical when it comes to teaching portfolio? Would that be a collection of syllabi and et cetera, or is it just narrating what have you done in your teaching in these last 6 years?
A portfolio means a collection of things in this case. So you would work that narrative into your personal statement. So in that 3 to 6 page statement, you would say, and here's how I've developed, this is what I've taught, this is how I've developed my teaching, this is where I am now. And then if you wanted to, either a portfolio on paper or a virtual portfolio, you could include exams, syllabi, assignments, anything that illustrated your success as a teacher. Yeah. or as a researcher, or as an artist, or as a dramaturge, or whatever else. We are a comprehensive university, or as a librarian. Thank you. You didn't even have to say it this time. Any last questions? Yes, ma'am.
To add to the last question, if within these years I practically created a few textbooks, should they all be in this portfolio so it will be a big stack?
A big stack is great. So the question was, if I have developed textbooks over these 6 years, should I include them with the materials I submit? Absolutely, you should include them. Or a link to the online version or something. Yes, they should be part of that.
Another question, is it possible to jump from one qualification to another, like I am a senior instructor 1, can I switch to lecturer number something? Because this is something that came up quite unexpectedly. In the college they said I have the right because I've been working with graduate students for years, teaching them for years, advising them for years, and so on. And I'm totally confused about this qualifications or statuses and what it is.
Thank you for raising that. It's a really important thing to get on your radar. Promotion is not the same as reclassification. So now that we have a fuller range of NTTF classifications, including the relatively new classification of lecturer, we are independent of the promotion process, reclassifying people if their duties and responsibilities fit better under a different classification than the one they have been classified in to date. So I see a lot of requests for reclassification to lecturer, or sometimes from research assistant to research associate, or sometimes reclassification from research associate to research professor. Those are not promotion. Those are making sure that you are in the correct category, the category and the classification that best describes what your duties and responsibilities are. So if we reclassify you, it is a much easier process. I need a justification from your immediate supervisor explaining why what you do corresponds better to a different classification. And there's some paperwork that has to be done through what is still currently unclassified personnel services, but it comes directly to me. I make a quick review and a determination, and then you are transferred laterally. So if you are a senior instructor 1 and we reclassify you to lecturer, you would be a senior lecturer 1. And then when you come up for promotion, it would be in the lecturer series.
Oh, but my promotion process has already started. So when is the time? Does it go simultaneously?
We can do we can do it before the due date for the promotion. The reclassification request can happen very expeditiously. It takes much less time than the promotion process because the only point of review is through me. You need to have your immediate supervisor write it up. It has to get the approval of the dean, and then it comes to my office. And it's really it's like the sorting hat in Harry Potter, right? We're just making sure that people are in the right classification. So yes, that's correct. So if you've been doing the job of a lecturer, we should get you the lecturer classification, and then we'll promote you as a lecturer. Yeah, good question. I'm being corrected on my Harry Potter here. Oh, she wants to be in Gryffindor. We can do that. We'll write that into the next version of the CBA. Excellent. Karen. No, you can carry the years of service into the next promotion. So presumably what you've been doing, what you are doing, and what justifies reclassification is what you've been doing all along. And so the years of service under a different name will count towards the promotion. So we have somebody sitting in the room to whom that might pertain very soon. Right, okay. Any other reclassification or other questions? Oh, yes, ma'am, sorry.
I have a question about, I'm kind of going way back to the beginning of the presentation about the renewal of the 1-year contract. So for your review, it's going to be screen evaluation and peer review. Are you also submitting those other part of your week? Is just those 2 days?
Yeah, so you're not responsible. The question is, what does the individual need to produce for a contract renewal review? All you need to do is provide, you don't need to provide anything. Your department or your unit will do the peer review, will have the evaluations if you're an officer of instruction, and that will be used as the material for the review. But you're not responsible for anything else other than a conversation with your supervisor at some point. Sure. I want to miss you again. Anything else?
No, I just wanted to point it out.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else immediate, I invite you to roll up something to go, take it with you, and remember where to find us. You can reach me by telephone or by email. And please do get in touch. There are many, 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 many individual situations that need to be worked out now because we're not yet entirely in compliance with our brand new beautiful rules and procedures. So if there are any gray areas, anything where we need to make a reasonable assessment and come to some kind of agreement, let me know, and I'm always happy to talk to your department heads and your deans as well. Yes? Megan's question is, are there resources that would give you models for examples of templates for portfolios, statements, CVs? I think our union reps have left. I think the union has the intention of making those available sooner or later. I don't think they're there yet. But I would say that your colleagues in your department are probably your best resource. So, for example, eons ago when I came up for promotion, I asked a colleague to share his documents with me so I could get some sense of what was appropriate. Your department could build a bank of those, assuming that the people whose documents they are allow them to be shared in that way. I think it's a really good idea to see what is best practices for your department and in your field. And that means that you'll have something to go from. You don't have to recreate the wheel. And you're doing something that is similar. Especially, it would be advisable to get the documents from someone whose promotion process was successful, right? So you want to look at good models of the genre. But it's really helpful to have some sense of what they can look like.
I'm curious about people who have been in the position for maybe 15 or 20 years and have never been promoted.
But what a good question. So the question is, if you've been in rank for a very long time and you didn't have a chance to get promoted because nobody thought of it and it didn't occur to you to ask, can you go from the first rank to the third rank immediately? The answer is no. You're going to have to go through the middle rank, but I would think you might request, say, 3 or 4 years down the road, an expedited promotion request for the third level. So we might be able to accommodate with the next one those many, many years of service. But you can't go from 1 to 3. You have to pass through 2. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.